Mic'd up.
Hello out there today. Welcome to our podcast, Ask Aaron and EJ. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
This is Coach Aaron, the source. EJ, got a pretty good topic today. It's 2025, and there's going to be a lot of changes. There's been a lot of changes in college athletics, so we're going to start this one off with the current state of college athletics. And I just want to go over some of the recent rulings that happened this past year, but are going to be but may be enacted next year or this year, 2025. And and let's just talk about how the college landscape may be changing. You know, is it still the wild wild west? It seems to be. I mean, uh,
Right.
I could name a few Clint Eastwood titles that would describe so. uh,
Right.
yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
fistful of dollars for a few dollars more. The good, the bad, transfer portal,
exactly.
uh,
Exactly.
and NIL for Sister Sarah, just to name a few.
I love it,
It's
man. That's
crazy
true.
here. And you know what? It's funny because it seems like the new sheriff in town, if we're going with my cowboy analogy here, is it's increasingly the state courts. They seem to be deciding what's going on. It's not
Right.
CA. So we're seeing a power shift, maybe a power struggle. But I don't think there's anything really on the athlete side other than the courts, and until there's some entity that somehow puts together some kind of, I
Right.
don't know, collective bargaining, if that's the term you want to use, on behalf of the athletes. I think this is what we're going to see more of. But anyway, never been a big fan of the NCAA, and it's
Right.
been a little bit, hypocritical and draconian in its approach in handling sports. But the professionalization of sports is here,
Yes, it
and
is.
and and the NCAA seems to be more reactionary than proactive in what they're trying to accomplish, or at least maintaining control. I don't know if that's the best approach, and so we've got a lot of things in turmoil. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I'm glad it's a great subject. I'm glad you mentioned it today. It seems like every 2 months, I used to say every quarter, Aaron, but every 2 months now, we are finding different rulings on NIL about the state of collegiate sports. And it really comes down to one thing I believe it's money. And so many people are misguided that don't have the information, kind of set in stone. There's no rules. I mean, there are rules, but the rules are, like you said, wild wild west rules. And basically we're saying, hey, athletes, you can come and go when you want. You have free agency any time of the year. It's all right to leave. We'll get somebody else. I mean, it's almost like a meat market. And I hate to use that terminology too,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it really is becoming that, Aaron, with how people are looking about their college experience. Is this really about being a student athlete? Or is this really being about a professional athlete? That's where we're at today.
right. Yeah. And I guess to frame today's podcast, what I want to do is go through probably some of the five most recent
Mhm.
changes that have occurred. And you know, my feeling is this is proponents that have been anti NCAA, like me, some of the athletes, have are for these changes, but you know you break it, you fix it. And I don't see any
Right.
at side who's really, there hasn't been a cohesive plan to fix this. And if you're waiting for the NCAA to fix it, I don't know if that's really, they kind of have to because they're the overseer of all this stuff, but they may not fix it in a way that really is beneficial to the athletes in the end. And
Hmm.
that's kind of, I think, what we're seeing. They're doing things on a case by case basis,
Right.
is because they have to react to these court cases. And, that in itself, I think, has started to shed some light on some of the inequities that student athletes might face. I mean, if you look at it, um, most of these things are based off of court cases that are brought about by elite level athletes,
Right.
not your everyday athlete.
Hmm.
And so, you got to wonder, is this going to, and maybe elite level schools. So,
Right.
it seems like a lot of these things end up working out for the upper echelon athlete or institution, but leave Main Street, you know, uh, on the wayside. Maybe left
Right.
holding back, maybe left having to compete in an unfair, environment, or having to take on now, or trying to scramble to take on more financial burdens. Maybe not having as many available slots for everyday, Joe Lunch Pail athletes. So I guess we're getting what we asked for. It's mirroring American capitalism.
Oh
uh,
man.
more,
Yes.
more. And I don't know what the road to the equity is, but it's just something I think we should look at. So I just want to go through. I picked about five of the most, I guess, publicized
Right.
of rulings or decisions that have come down. The most recent, let's talk, and we'll just go through each one and kind of
Yeah.
just give our thoughts. But um, the first one was the JC extension uh,
Ugh.
court ruling. I think that was the most recent,
Yeah.
and um, involved the Vanderbilt quarterback Paiva, where
Hmm.
the NCAA granted a waiver for all Division I student athletes with expiring eligibility who attended a non-NCAA school for the
Right.
526 school year. So it includes all former junior college and NAIA.
Hmm.
So anyone during that period who's going to be completing their season during that period actually gets another year. Um, so it only affects a small pool of athletes.
Right.
And again, this was brought on by a kid, high profile athlete at a high profile school.
Right.
Um, the underpinnings seem to be the inability to maximize their NIL um,
Absolutely.
opportunities, and so they filed an antitrust lawsuit, and that's what seems to be behind a lot of this stuff is the antitrust.
Right.
Again, it, this is something that touches, I guess, more of the elite level athletes, and we'll talk about that
Hmm.
more when we talk about the
Right.
this discrepancy of who is really benefiting from NIL and who isn't. But I don't know. It's What are your thoughts, man?
This is what I want to say about this because I thought it was a very interesting case, you know. And what I'm seeing is that there is a backlog with athletes being older playing sports. You know, there's no longer 22 years old, you're done with college.
Yeah.
It seems like you're 25. Um, and you're done with college since COVID. When COVID happened and all this stuff started happening, we started granting
Right.
athletes basically 2 years
Hmm.
to complete. 2 additional leagues. So you're saying 6 years
Hmm.
to finish four. And if you got hurt, it's basically 7 years to finish four.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when it started there, that's why they said there needs to be this correction. NCAA says, listen, okay, we have all these athletes now who are in junior college and they're in NAIA. Why are they being penalized again? Well, my goodness, you gave them 2 extra years. Why are you giving them a third year? That's what this is all about. It's all about, hey, let's have um, participation trophies again and let's make it fair. It's not, there's no equity here in this because what about the athlete who can't afford to go to college and they need to finish in 4 years or 5 years because they can't pay off their loans
Yeah.
and they don't have NIL money. They're not in the SEC, they're not in a Power Four, and they don't have that money spread out amongst everybody, and they don't have this closet full of money. What about them? And that's what this comes down to. Hey, athletes gets bigger and stronger at 23, 24, 25. Aaron, you and I know that they're going to mature. Now college coaches have to keep their jobs. They'll go out and grab that athlete and say, hey, listen, to all you 18, 19, and 20-year-old athletes, guess what? I'm sorry, your college career is over. It comes down to winning, money, and how can we align this to keep my job as a coach and as an institution, whether it's the president of the institution or it's the athletic director or whatever you want to call it. This it's not equality anymore in this, and they're trying to make it fair, but all they're doing is creating more problems each and every day. They start to have extension in student athletes ability to complete their academics over a longer period of time. A lot of athletes there, some athletes say, listen, I want to make my money. Maybe I'm not a good enough professional, but I'm a great college athlete. Let me go ahead and make my money that way. And that's what this first ruling to me seems like it's all about.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, Greg had actually just asked this question. I'll play Greg's question
Okay,
for
go
you.
ahead.
Hey, Aaron, I think it's sort of interesting that we're starting to be a lot more flexible about time kids can spend in school before going pro or not.
Hmm.
It's real interesting. As a little shaver, I used to play against adults, and I thought that was a good thing, but that may not be good for everyone. What's your opinion? Who wins and who loses with these rule changes?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And you just laid it out. But
yeah.
for me to answer that question is the late bloomers.
Right.
The athletes who go through school and don't go through high school and don't reclassify, the athletes who are true student athletes,
Hmm.
who love to play sports, but they know they're not going to go pro, or there's no, after college there's no more sports, or maybe even after high school there's no more sports.
Right.
Those athletes are now getting squeezed out. They're getting squeezed out by older, bigger, stronger athletes, more experienced athletes, and they're getting squeezed out just not only on the playing field physically and athletically, but they're getting squeezed out, financially.
Yes.
And so I think those are the kids who are the losers. And it's like, how do you buy them time? You can't buy them time because there's no place for them to go. The JCs are now becoming impacted with bounce backs and transfer portal athletes who, again, a kid who just wants to play college sports because of the love of the game, uh, is now graduating at 17 and has to compete against a guy at a junior college who's 21, 22, you know? and
Right.
and has a year or maybe more of some college experience. So I think those are the losers, and so you may end up seeing a lot of kids just say, "Hey, look, after high school, sports isn't in the cards for me anymore." And maybe you get fewer and fewer. wanting to move on, or
Mhm.
that's kind of my initial
Mhm. Mhm.
thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, Aaron, I want to bounce some off you a little bit. I think it was a good question. It was at one time. It's good to get the experience and play against an older guy. It was like, hey, that's a good one time, two time, three time experience. Now you're talking about, hey, I'm gonna go play against a man versus a 18-year-old 19-year-old athlete that just left high school. Now I'm going to play against this guy's 23,
right,
24 that's been granted. And you're going to tell me that there is a difference. And every sport's different. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, if we talk football, you're going to tell me a 19-year-old guy coming out of high school is going to go against a man and he's going to get manhandled basically on experience. Forget
right,
about talent. Talent talent is talent, but I'm talking about, we're seeing a lot of that these days in all the sports, but in football that kind of comes off the mind. And if I think about baseball, could you imagine a 19-year-old high school player coming into collegiate baseball 5 months after 5 months after their first year, and they're facing a guy out there throwing 99 with a nasty slider and a changeup, and they think that that is good for that player and that player's confident. There's a whole bunch of issues you can really get into, but Aaron, like I said earlier, what are we doing here in the student athlete experience now? Is that removed from collegiate sports now? That's the one question that I like someone to ask, ask us again. Is that a something that's a dying novelty for collegiate athletics, student athlete? Is that what this is really about, or is it just about athletics and money?
yeah.
You know,
Well, I think there's two aspects of that. It is about athletes and money,
right?
again, but I think that's more at the upper echelon. And then, and after looking at some of these things, I had to ask myself the question: does this really? I mean, it does affect the the average student athlete, in a trickle down way, but has it really changed? Other than has it really changed for the regular student athlete? And I guess that kind of leads into the next question I want to talk about, which is NIL, which is kind of
Okay.
seems to be in the backdrop of a lot of these things. Um, in reality, you know, only the top 1% make most of the money in NIL. And looking at a few stats, in football, the average was $3,400 a month,
Mm-hmm.
40K a year. And
Mm-hmm.
across all sports, it's 21K a year. Well, that's only $10 an hour, full
I
time.
know.
So it's not a lot of money, and it's not going to a lot of kids. Um, and so and again, I don't know, but I'm just wondering if, all these headlines about a lot of these things, again, they always seem to involve more of the upper echelon and elite level athletes institutions, really are things that the average athlete who says, hey, you know what, I just want to get my degree and I want to play college sports, um, and graduate with my degree and move on with my life.
Right.
Does it, really matter to, some of the more, I guess, less revenue producing sports, track and field, tennis, golf, some of those others, to those, does it really matter to those athletes? And even though it's not quite business as usual the way we came up through sports,
Right.
but other than, the landscape we've talked about, you know, fewer roster spots and you know, competing against older athletes. Other than that, I don't know if it's really, you know, means a whole lot to a lot of athletes. I don't know.
Yeah,
What's your thought?
here's my take on it. And you're right. I think you make a really good point. The schools that have tons of money, maybe it affects them a lot differently than a mid-major. Okay, so
Yeah,
you're talking about, you know, a Power Four, big campus, Big Ten, um,
Big
talking
12.
SEC, Big 12,
Yeah,
ACC. Okay, those are Power Fours. Okay, and then you've got the mid majors. The conferences where I think you're seeing all the players that are pushed back from those Power Fours go to mid majors now because they were squeezed out by an older athlete, basically. Okay, so there's a trickle down effect in this whole thing. So if you keep on trickling down and it goes all the way down to high school athletes, and your point earlier about this college experience, and the high school experience becomes very important now. And it becomes important because athletes go, I can't play sports in college because I'm dealing with this older athlete. But more importantly, they go, I could go to Division 3. My grades are pretty good, but they're not good enough. And my parents can't afford that. And they go, "Oh, where do I go to JC and then transfer?" I mean, there's a whole bunch of other issues that are happening here. But when you're looking at these athletes that are getting more money at the upper echelon schools, the Power Fours, and they come down to the mid majors, I think it's very difficult for athletes to decide. And the persona in the public is so misguided with, hey, my kid can go and play here. I saw this guy play here. That's no longer the case. The public is the parents with these student athletes, they don't know the underlying kind of like story behind collegiate athletics now 100%. I'm not saying all the parents, but the majority of parents don't really know the experience and how it's changed now with the issue of money and the issue with an older athlete. So for me, Aaron, at this time, um, I think parents need to really stop and take a deep breath and a deep dive and be very honest with where we at as a family and and with their kid in any sport now. They need to just evaluate it and take their time with that. And it's just it is the way it is today, and you have to have a plan,
yeah. And
basically.
and actually, that's I'm glad you went that direction because Danny has a good question on how you know how do parents and athletes now navigate that. So let's listen to
Okay.
Danny's.
Can you talk about how this is going to change recruitment strategies for schools and athletes? Thanks.
Mm,
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about recently in our other podcasts
right.
where now you do have to really look at, hey, how do I position myself and what's the strategy that I can use to ultimately get to the school I want to get to. And I know we talked about going to that NAIA or that lower level school, however you want to call it, or a
Right.
JC, and trying to get that experience after a year or two where you're older, where you're more experienced, a little bit more marketable, and kind of at least tried to even out that competitive landscape,
Right.
and then transfer uh, to you know a bigger school. So maybe taking that smaller offer where you're wanted and you're going to get the opportunity to play and grow, and you do that for a year, maybe 2 years, and then reassess where you are as an athlete and what your marketability is, out in the greater marketplace.
Yeah. No
That's
question.
You know,
No.
is probably a strategy more and more athletes are going to have to adopt, because coming straight out of high school is going to be very hard, and that's going to be, again, I'd say, for those very top level talented athletes.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because most people think that that only affects like at Power Four school, right? It
Mhm.
affects every school across the board. It's not just the highest level of collegiate sports in a sport. It affects mid majors, Division 2, Division 3. It affects all of that, and I really understanding recruiting. That was a great question by Danny. Is that yeah, you're going to need to, like you and I've said, reassess where you're at. Maybe you go to a smaller school and move forward. But I'm gonna throw a little wrench in here, Aaron. I see a lot of athletes who do that. Say, you know what? I'm staying here at the school. I kind of like, because I've had conversations with a couple athletes who said, you know what? I think I'm going to go to this Division 3 school for a couple years or this Division 2 and then transfer to a Division 1 school.
Mhm.
And then I talked to them 2 years later, and it's 2 years later now, and they go, I kind of like where I'm at.
Yeah.
I don't I like my experience here,
Yeah.
and college is about the experience,
Right.
the whole experience, not just experience playing. I'm talking about the collegiate experience as a student, as an athlete, as a person meeting and greeting others, and just the whole socialization of college.
Right. And
And I think that's important. That guys are staying, man. Guys and gals are staying now. They're not taking off like I may have thought they would have taken off.
right. Yeah. And that's why, I always ask the question now, well, who does this really affect? Is this just headlines? And does it really affect your everyday, not athlete student, but
Hmm.
student athlete?
Right.
Because it seems to me a lot of these instances are addressing issues that are for athletes who happen to be students, not student.
Right, right, right.
And, and so, yeah, I think you're right, and I'm
Right.
glad to hear, and I've had a couple athletes come back who have said the same thing, and I'm glad
Hmm.
hearing that, is that they're really keeping their eye. Most of these athletes are staying grounded, and they're keeping their eye on the ball, which is to get an education.
Right, 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 right. I,
So
I agree with you there.
yeah.
100%. I had to throw that out there, Aaron. I had to throw a monkey wrench in it a little bit about, what I've been hearing. It's kind of funny because I think also players reassess where they're at that time. Like
Hmm.
2 years later, hey, this is where I'm at. I've gotten better. I've gotten stronger. But hey, am I really going to play at this next place? Do they really want me that bad? Because here's another thing too. I think people don't really understand. Say like you go into the portal,
Hmm.
okay? And I heard at one time there were 19,000 kids in the portal in
Yeah.
baseball. Okay. So you go in the portal, you leave your school, and you can't go back. That's what people forget. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I go in the portal, I'm leaving, and what if things don't work out?
Yeah, yeah, and that it was funny because I'm actually going to bring up the transfer portal too, and some of the stats I looked at just real quickly were, in the last 3 years it was 19,000 athletes in the transfer portal, and then 23,000, and now it's up to 26,000, and I'm just wondering if athletes really understand, you know, um, what happens in the transfer portal.
Right.
you know, they've got to really, I think, understand how that all works, so that if the transfer portal is part of your recruitment strategy, you've got to understand that you've got to be in good academic standing
Right.
into the transfer portal. You've also got to meet the academic requirements for the next school, um, to, uh, go into the portal. If you're not taken out of the portal,
Right.
current school does not have to take you back. They can, any financial help that they've given you, they can rescind.
Right.
And so you can be left in basically a limbo, some kind of limbo for whatever period of time that is. I don't know, a semester, a year, until the next,
Right.
portal opening. And so now you're talking about it affecting, um, maybe affecting some of your academic standing in terms of, hey, you know, I'm stuck at this school. Can I continue with my education and get the right classes? Or because I'm going to change, I want to change schools. You know what I'm saying? Do I?
Yes. It's complicated,
It's
Aaron. It's
complicated.
complicated now for those athletes who don't really understand the portal. They
Right.
don't. And they don't think about, they think, hey, I'm just going to transfer. It's going to be easy. It's not. There's so much communication. There's so many, things you have to do to try to figure out, is this the best place I need to be? It is so like, people just think it's easy. I could just move here and it's easy. It's not. What if you can't move there and you have to go back to the institution? You were on a scholarship all of a sudden, Aaron, and now your scholarship's gone. Now you have to pay for your education. Now
Exactly.
you can't get your classes in time.
Yeah.
Now you're not put to the front of the list to get your classes, so you go to practice and get your classes. Now you're just a regular student fighting for your education now.
Right.
People don't understand that. They're so misguided by, I'm just going to transfer. It's
Yeah.
easy. They,
Yeah.
they they're going to want me. You need to reassess your ability as an athlete, and you need to turn that around, because they don't understand, to be a professional athlete, that is such a small percentage, Aaron. Small, super small. And they think I'm going to go to this level. It's not that easy. Hey, get your education. Get your education. Think about that. People need to stop and take a breath and back up 40 years and go, hey, student athlete, rather than NIL athlete student,
Right.
or athlete student.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got a listener here, Mike Miller of
Okay.
Yankees Coast to Coast, one of our mic'd up podcast brothers here. Um, and he was a junior college baseball coach, and let's listen to what he had to say on this subject. He's in line with what we were talking about.
Okay. Okay.
So Michael Miller from Yankees Coast to Coast on the Mic'd Up app, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. I'm a former JC baseball coach, and I think the fact that they get 2 years at a JC, or 3 if they redshirt, and then they can go to a 4-year school and get 2 years or 3 years if they redshirt, is more than enough. If they get 4 years at a 4-year school and 2 at a JC, you'll have 26-year-olds against 18-year-olds, and that seems wrong, unfair.
Yeah. And that echoes exactly what you said. So
Mhm.
we're not alone in our thinking on this. And I'm glad Mike chimed in, because again, sometimes I don't want people to think that this is obviously an opinion show,
Right. Right.
um, but I think there are like minds out there who are saying, hey, this is starting to get ridiculous for your average high school athlete, and
Yeah.
to have to navigate it.
Yeah. I like that Mr. Miller from Coast to Coast, our Yankee podcast, Mic'd Up Brother, said, hey, this is unfair. It is unfair. And um people think that it's all right. It's not all right. They Unless you play at this level of sports and you understand and you've been it and you lived it at that level and saw it live. I mean, not on TV. I'm talking about live you'll understand why it's uneven and how it's unfair. And I mentioned it earlier about, hey, you're taking a 19-year-old kid that came from high school, and all of a sudden he's facing this 25-year-old kid who had, again, like Mr. Miller said, all these experience, 4 years and 2 years at JC, and he's out there pitching, and all of a sudden they've never seen this before. The psyche of that 19-year-old athlete is just, and he's not ready,
Yeah.
and he's just getting. hammered every game, you know, the confidence, that athlete's going to lose their confidence a little bit, you know, and you better have a good sports psychologist like Doug Gardner out there,
Yeah,
as I always say,
that's right.
out
Think
there.
sport,
Yeah,
right?
think sport. I'm gonna give you hey, I'm gonna give you a shout out, Doug Gardner. But unless you got Doug Gardner on staff, you know, you better have a lot of those guys in the think tank for these athletes. Not only these 19-year athletes, I'm talking about these guys maybe a year out of JC come there and they were really good, and all of a sudden they see this high powered guy. I mean, it goes to extremes here. And I'm glad he mentioned that because I agree with our friend Mr. Miller from the Yankees coast to coast.
Yeah. No, I we'll wrap this up, but I think you made an important point there about the maturity level of these athletes, and I don't, obviously it's all case by case basis, but we're talking about
Right.
young men and women who are still, forming as adults, trying to make these decisions, and sometimes it's with informed, parents, and sometimes it's with ill-informed parents. And there just isn't the consistency yet for people to understand, hey, how things really play out for, I think, the best decisions to be made. I mean, should a kid be dreaming about NIL money when, you know, you know, I don't know, 5'7", 160 pounds, and a running back in high school? Not unless he's very, very exceptional.
Right.
Should a 100-meter sprinter who runs, 10.7 seconds in high school be worried about what his NIL money is going to be? Um, but parents and athletes are making decisions based on, some things, some of these headlines, and I don't know if it's the best way to proceed. I don't think it is, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it causes it's cause for a lot of heartache and a lot of heartburn and an unenjoyable college experience. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as a walk on, a recruited walk on myself, who ended up earning a scholarship later on. Um, College was a great experience, and not because of any money that I got. You know,
No. Right. I mean,
it
it's the friendships that you
exactly.
you you have and the people that you meet, and it's the networking of later in life that
Yeah,
comes back full circle when at a young youth age you didn't realize that would come full circle. It
right,
really comes back to full
right.
circle. And I've, we both have met so many people in our college experience that maybe 15, 20, 30 years later it comes back full circle again on us, and because of that experience it's enriched our lives, and I think that's what college athletics should be about.
Yeah, that's the true value of college athletics. And
Right.
this professionalism or capitalistic theme of what's going on in sports now, and you're starting to have more of the have and the have nots.
Mm-hmm.
There's the old adage that sports mirrors society, and maybe in that case it's actually true or becoming true, because we're starting to see the system at least accommodate the give the perks and opportunities to the elite level athletes, elite level schools, uh, you know, and you've got these young athletes who, even if they're making poor choices, are running to the courts to rectify, you know, what may have happened with them. Whereas in our case, we would have just said, okay, well, we lost a year, and that's it, and we
Mhm. Right.
they've even increased the red shirt rule, where you can play up to 30% of your season
Right.
for your red shirt. So, I mean, there's a lot of extensions going out to give athletes every opportunity to play.
Right.
And sometimes I'm wondering if these things are the envelopes being pushed to, again, accommodate a small number of athletes while leaving, while putting more downward pressure on, the main street, athlete.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just a thought, but it'll
I
be
know.
interesting. I mean, I'll keep watching. Hopefully things will work out for the everyday athlete where they can at least get the opportunities and the chance to experience all that college athletics has. Again, both of us are product of that, and
Right.
it's changed our lives.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, Aaron, that kind of wraps up our mic'd up show today. Ask Aaron and Ask EJ on Mic'd Up today. And this is Coach EJ, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron, the source. I'd like to thank all you guys who sent in questions. Sorry didn't get to all of them, but I appreciate your participation, and please show up again for us. Thank you.